The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, the soft clinking of champagne glasses punctuated by low jazz that seemed to float effortlessly through the air, carrying the laughter and chatter of family and friends who had gathered to celebrate 20 years of marriage. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, adjusting the sleeve of her gown, her eyes scanning the familiar faces and the faces she had long since learned to read like a book, except for one, her husband's. James, her husband, seemed impossibly composed, his smile wide, almost too perfect, as he whispered something to a waiter who had just arrived with a tray of meticulously arranged desserts. The man's face was unervingly familiar. Her pulse quickened as her mind connected the dots. It was the same waiter she had seen in the photos the private investigator had sent her weeks ago, the one she had reluctantly hired after the late-night phone calls, the strange trips, the vanishing hours that made her stomach twist in suspicion. The realization hit her like a cold knife. The person who had been watching her for months, following her errands, taking photos of her every move, was now standing here in plain sight, pretending to serve at their anniversary celebration. She smiled faintly, keeping her expression neutral, though inside, her mind raced like a bullet train. Every laugh from James, every casual wave to relatives, now seemed rehearsed for an audience that didn't include her comfort, only her destruction. The dinner proceeded smoothly, everyone oblivious to the storm brewing behind her carefully controlled exterior. The wine flowed, the speeches were given, and James continued to display his perfection, the charming husband everyone admired, unaware that his wife had begun to see him for what he truly was. She recalled the subtle warnings the investigator had listed. Small hints, like James insisting she skip certain events, mysterious phone calls answered in hushed tones, and, most importantly, the delivery of a strange envelope weeks earlier that she had intercepted before it could reach her hands, a note, almost laughing in its cruelty. "Tonight, everything ends beautifully." She had brushed it off then, unwilling to believe her own heart's dark suspicion. But now, in the glittering hall with the perfect setup of family and flowers, the words carved themselves into her mind, sharper than any knife. Dessert arrived, a collection of pastries arranged as meticulously as a museum exhibit. Her stomach churned as the waiter placed a delicate chocolate tart in front of her, its glossy surface almost mocking. She looked around, carefully scanning the table. Her mother-in-law, sitting to her left, had always been cold toward her, making little jabs throughout the years, her disdain as obvious as the rings on her fingers. The thought struck her like lightning. What if James's plan wasn't just cruel, but precise? What if this celebration, this perfect facade of love and longevity, was a cover for something far more sinister? Acting quickly, she switched her plate with her mother-in-law's, heart hammering violently, each second stretching into an eternity as she waited, barely daring to breathe. The first bite had been taken by her mother-in-law before anyone noticed anything amiss. Then, without warning, the older woman began to tremble, a sudden shudder running through her frail frame. Conversations halted abruptly, champagne glasses clinking to the table as relatives watched in horror. Her mother-in-law's eyes widened in confusion and fear, her body collapsing forward as panic erupted around the room. Screams filled the hall, but she stood frozen, a mix of fear and relief colliding violently in her chest. Relief that she herself had not touched the dessert, and horror at the confirmation of her darkest suspicion. James had planned to kill her, his wife of 20 years, and had used a party meant to celebrate love as a meticulously staged execution plan. The clarity of it struck her like ice. Every smile he had offered, every whispered word, every toast had been part of a performance leading up to her death. James's face contorted, not in fear, but in surprise, though not the kind that comes with failed plans. It was the surprise of a man realizing the chessboard had turned against him. His eyes met hers across the room, and in that split second, she saw the truth of the man she had loved for 2 decades, a man capable of meticulously planning her demise, all while hiding behind the mask of a devoted husband. Her mind raced as adrenaline surged, each detail of their life together flashing in cruel irony. The anniversary gifts, the vacations, the whispered promises in the night, all of them tainted now by his willingness to end her life with a smile on his face. The room descended into chaos, guests pulling her mother-in-law into the arms of a relative as paramedics were called, their sirens distant and faint against the background of sobbing and panic. James tried to speak, his voice tight, desperate, but she barely heard him. All she could feel was the cold clarity of revenge and survival, and the bitter taste of heartbreak that came with the revelation that the man she had trusted most in the world had intended to destroy her. She stood, not shaking, not crying, but calculating, watching him as his charming facade began to crumble under the weight of his own miscalculation. When the paramedics wheeled her mother-in-law out, she approached James slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step a drumbeat of judgment. His eyes widened, panic finally flickering in the corners of his gaze, but she didn't flinch. She had recorded everything, every word he had whispered to the waiter, every gesture of his careful planning, every fleeting glance that had revealed his intentions. The thought of exposing him, not just to their family but to the world, brought a dark satisfaction that tasted almost sweet. She leaned in, her voice calm, ice-laced, carrying the weight of 20 years of trust shattered. "You were going to kill me," she said simply, watching as his carefully maintained composure finally collapsed into fear and realization. The room had quieted. Only the faint jazz still played, oblivious to the tragedy that had almost occurred. Guests whispered, glances darting between her and James, suspicion and horror settling like dust. She stepped back, her gaze unwavering, knowing that tonight would mark the end of not just the celebration, but the life she had known. James's plans, meticulously executed, had failed because of one quiet act of awareness, her presence of mind. She realized, as she watched him stumble for words, that love had been replaced entirely by survival instinct, and heartbreak by a grim satisfaction that she had turned his trap back upon him. By the time the authorities arrived, James was silent, the weight of his own intentions hanging over him like a storm cloud. She had survived, unscathed physically, but forever changed. The chandelier. Lights above seemed to flicker in acknowledgment, casting long shadows over the ballroom that had almost been her tomb. She smiled faintly, bitterly, knowing that the man she had once trusted beyond all else was now nothing more than a cautionary tale in the glittering hall of what was meant to be the happiest night of their lives. As the paramedics wheeled away the unconscious mother-in-law, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The shock, the horror, the heartbreak, they all swirled within her like a storm, but the clarity of survival, of justice earned through wit and courage, settled firmly in her bones. 20 years of marriage had ended tonight, not with love, but with revelation, betrayal, and a meticulous demonstration of human darkness. She would walk out of that ballroom forever changed, and James, once the architect of her demise, would face a world where every secret, every whispered plan, had finally been exposed. The music faded into the night, the chandeliers shimmering one last time, indifferent witnesses to the twisted tale of love, betrayal, and survival that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives.